Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome very much. So at this third annual CLES Prestige Lecture, we are very happy to see you all here. It's a pretty cold afternoon here in Potchefstroom, but we hope that the presentation of this afternoon will warm you all up. So I am Anel du Plessis. I'm the incumbent of the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability. And we are here thanks to the financial support of the National Research Foundation of South Africa, the NRF. And we annually host a public lecture of this kind to have an opportunity for anyone interested, be it from the public or the university or government, to attend a lecture or afterwards listen to, it is being recorded, on a theme that speaks to something that is ultimately of relevance to all of us in this country. We are very, very fortunate to have Danga Mughogho here with us this afternoon. Danga and I have met many, many years ago. He's also been here with the launch of the CLES in 2019, and he's part of the South African Cities Network, as you will hear when Nonhlanhla formally introduce him. And the CLES chair has a formal MOU also with SACN. So Danga, from my side, thank you for being here and very much welcome. Just a little bit on the chair for those of you who might not know what we do and who we are, although I see that most of the faces here this afternoon have attended some of our functions in the past. But we are, in a nutshell, a research hub within the Faculty of Law of the NWU, and we form part of the research unit, represented here this afternoon by its director, Professor Mitsi Wietse, who will also say something just after me. And what we do at CLES is mainly research, be it at postgraduate level. Many of the people here this afternoon are busy with their master's or doctoral degrees in an aspect of urban law and governance. And then we also, in addition to that, do research projects. We work on scholarly publications. We work on research reports if requested to do so by other institutions. And ultimately, the aim is to contribute to knowledge in the field of the intersection of law, local government, local governance, and of course, environmental sustainability. As you will hear soon, this presentation of this afternoon is not necessarily and directly aimed at environmental management or environmental science or environmental sustainability even. But unless we get municipal finance right in this country, we cannot start focusing on issues of environmental sustainability, and I'm sure that Danga will also allude to that. If any of you are interested in hearing more about bursary opportunities at CLES or how to become involved in its research, you are welcome to speak to any of us involved with the chair. You can also do so after today's lecture, but otherwise we have an up and running website, and we are also pretty active on social media. You are welcome to follow us there. Without any further ado, I'm going to ask Prof. Mitsi to come to the front and say a few words on behalf of the faculty, and thereafter we will have Nonhlanhla, who will introduce Danga, and then we can sit back and relax and listen to Danga's talk. Prof. Wietse.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you all here this afternoon on behalf of the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Law, Dr. Naomi Ray. Unfortunately, she could not join us this afternoon, but you are welcomed here at the NRF SARCHI CLES Chair's third annual Prestige Lecture. It is an honor to be in the presence of a diverse audience, as Prof. Anel mentioned. Many people will listen to this recording later on as well. So a special word of welcome to our guests from outside the NWU, including legal practitioners, fundraising directors, members of non-profit organizations, and government officials. then a warm welcome to all of our NWU colleagues from various faculties, and also a special word of welcome to our postgraduate students and the members of CLES. Then, on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Mr Danga K Mughogho from the South African Cities Network. As Prof. Anel already mentioned, there's an official formal memorandum of understanding between CLES and the South African Cities Network. We're really pleased and privileged to have you here as our guest lecturer this afternoon, and we thank you for taking the time and the trouble to travel from Johannesburg to join us here this afternoon. Although my task is to make everyone feel welcome, I also want to use this opportunity to thank Professor Anel and her team for the arrangements for this guest lecture. I think you will all agree with me that it was once again done professionally and excellently. Thank you so much for all of your arrangements. And then, if you will allow me, as most of you know, Professor Anel will be leaving us soon, and we're very sad that she will be leaving us, but we hope her all of the best in the new chapter in her life awaiting her, and want to sincerely thank her for the huge contribution that she made to the faculty in research and postgraduate supervision over the past years. You're really a remarkable academic, so thank you for that contribution. And then we're also sad to see Ms. Bernalee Anthony going. She's also moving on. And Bernalee, I don't see you now, but I just want to say all of the best. May your new home treat you very well. And also thank you for your contribution to CLES and for establishing an excellent flagship chair at the Northwest University. So, Mr. Mughogho, we look forward to your presentation on the place of collaborative academic research in advancing education for good financial governance. The theme of your presentation is vital for the improvement and development of sustainable local governments in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My task is quite a short one, or a simple one, if I can say. There's a Zulu idiom, one that says that if you loosely translate it, you can never say too much of a person or their accolades. If you try and do that, you might be, or we might all be here the entire night. But what I will do is that I will really try and keep your introduction just a bit shorter. So our speaker, Mr. Danga K Mughogho, is a program manager. You will see that on the slides as well. He's a program manager of well-governed cities at the South African Cities Network. His portfolio basically looks at urban governance and municipal finances. The Well-Governed Cities program considers how our South African cities are currently governed and whether there is political and institutional, or whether the political and institutional context is stable enough, is open enough, and dynamic enough for us to be able to accommodate the varied objectives and interests that we have. The program focuses specifically on key issues that deal with institutional strength and capacity, financial management and administration, efficiency, and social political issues. Danga has worked in three countries, in 2 continents, and he's worked both in the public as well as in the private sector, including being an independent consultant in democratic governance, mostly conducting research on various issues for a range of clients, and these include the City of Johannesburg, the Department of Public Service and Administration, Mpumalanga Provincial Legislature, and he's also worked with the South African Local Government Association, SALGA. Danga has a BA degree majoring in economics from Harvard University, and he has a BA honors as well as a Masters of Social Science in Democratic Governance from the University of Cape Town. Mr. Mughogho, please, the podium now is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for those wonderful words of welcome. Despite being a program manager for well-governed cities and having been a one-time politician as well, I'm terrible with protocol and greetings and so on. So I actually was just going to say good afternoon to all of you. Many thanks to the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability, CLES, at the Northwest University for the invitation to present this third annual Prestige Lecture. It's very much an honor for me to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And to all of you in the audience and those of you who may watch this lecture online later, thank you for being here. I warmly remember meeting the chair, Anel du Plessis, at the Cities Network with my SACN colleagues in 2018, BC, before COVID. And my first visit to CLES in 2019 when you opened the chair, and I also presented on city finances at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Colloquium. But also in my work at the Cities Network, I've engaged a lot with the CLES associate Matt Glazer, who I'm sure many of you know, and we discuss municipal finances at length and very often on various occasions. So I feel to be amongst friends, and it's wonderful to be back in Potchefstroom again. So I was asked to speak on the place of collaborative academic research in advancing education for good financial governance in the local sphere. And with your indulgence, though, what I'm actually going to do is take some liberty in changing the title of the lecture to the place of collaborative academic research, rather, in advancing knowledge about governance in the local government sphere. And why do I choose to do this? One reason is that the lecture title presumes that education will result in good financial governance in the local government sphere. And in the lecture, I'll present evidence that suggests that such education has not actually resulted in those outcomes, which it would seem to me suggests that we still need to understand the causes of the symptoms of bad governance in local government, and we also need more knowledge and not necessarily more education. And not only do we need more knowledge, it has to be derived from research that is collaborative and transdisciplinary. And that, in a nutshell, is the thesis of my lecture today. The outline of my lecture is as follows. I will start by describing public financial management and the strategy of the primary stakeholder, National Treasury, for improving capacity in public financial management, focusing on the local sphere. I'll then address the question, what has this program of capacity development for public finance or management actually delivered? I then critique the approach to capacity building and illustrate another approach to understand the environment within which local government and municipalities operate. And I then make a call for ethnographic research and collaborative research, and end by giving you an overview of the organization I work for, and which, as you'll have heard in the introductory remarks, has a memorandum of understanding with CLES, the South African Cities Network. So first of all, to start by defining public financial management. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting defines public financial management as the system by which financial resources are planned, directed, and controlled to enable and influence the efficient and effective delivery of public service goals. That's the definition used in the National Treasury Capacity Development Strategy for Public Financial Management, published in 2008. The strategy begins by providing the context for public financial management in South Africa at that time. It says that the Public Financial Management Act of 1999 and the Municipal Finance Management Act 56 of 2003 moved the public sector from a traditional rules-based micro-control environment to a modern principle-based environment characterized by greater flexibility, transparency, and accountability. What, though, are the mandates and roles here? The strategy is situated within South Africa's overarching legislative framework and policy environment, the main elements of which are the Constitution, legislation related to public finance, service delivery, human resources and education, and training, and laws governing relationships between institutions and others. The National Treasury has a constitutional and national legislative mandate to manage public sector finances, including capacity development. Section 195(1) of the Constitution sets out the basic values and principles governing public administration. It obligates the public administration to encourage and maintain a high standard of professional ethics, promote the efficient, economic, and effective use of resources, be development-oriented, and cultivate good HR management and career development practices. Section 6(2)(d) of the PFMA stipulates that the National Treasury may assist departments and constitutional institutions in building their capacity for efficient, effective, and transparent financial management. This may include the development, issuing, and enforcing of uniform norms and standards, including norms and standards for public financial management practitioners. Section 34(1) of the MFMA on capacity building provides for the national and provincial government, by agreement, to assist municipalities in building the required capacity for efficient, effective, and transparent financial management. However, if we look at some of the deficits in skills and competencies that would be required for financial management to take place, the capacity development strategy of the National Treasury asserts that South Africa's shortage of skills is felt sharply in public financial management. The public sector is falling behind in the competition for scarce skills. According to the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, SAICA, only 1.6% of accountant posts in the public sector are filled by registered professionals, compared with 11.5% of such posts in the private sector. SAICA projections indicated that the supply of graduates and professionals entering the market is inadequate to keep up with increased demand. National Treasury reports that in 2010, vacancy rates for staff in the public sector averaged 31% for finance positions, 36% for supply chain management, 39% for internal audit, and 44% for risk management. The National Planning Commission diagnostic documents highlights the unevenness in state capacity, which leads to uneven performance in local, provincial, and national government. At a broader policy level, government's commitment to deliver on its mandate is expressed in the Presidential Outcomes Framework. Outcome 12 is an efficient, effective, and development-oriented public service, and Outcome 9, a responsive, accountable, effective, and efficient local government system. National Treasury notes that this has had specific implications for public financial management performance, underlining the need to enhance capacity. The strategy adopts a comprehensive approach to address the range and complexity of these challenges, but what actually does the capacity building strategy encompass? And that's what I'm going to describe next. First of all, it is comprehensive. The strategy includes evidence-based problem statements, strategic objectives, key activities, and an implementation plan. The strategy applies to national and provincial governments and local government. It covers functions typically associated with the offices of chief financial officers, as well as internal audit and enterprise risk management. For the purposes of this strategy, public financial management refers to management accounting, planning and budgeting, revenue management, expenditure management, asset management, both movable and immovable assets, financial accounting, supply chain management, internal control, enterprise risk management, and internal audit. The strategy outlines the public finance management challenges and associated strategic objectives, and it actually provides 4 problem statements in doing this. The first is that the environment does not support the development of high-performance organizations. South Africa has a shortage of skills in financial management, internal audit, and enterprise risk management, resulting in competition for a limited pool of resources between the public and private sectors. The institutional environment does not promote a culture to attract, select, develop, and retain talent, nor does it offer appropriate job standardization or education and training solutions. Secondly, inadequate organizational capacity hampers good public financial management and service delivery. Most national and provincial departments have low levels of PFM maturity. This reflects a lack of effective financial management systems and practices, and vacancy rates are high, averaging 34% in financial management, supply chain management, internal audit, and enterprise risk management. Staff turnover averages 14.6 months. The continuous change in the senior management staff after the new executive or municipal council results in the depletion of the institutional memory and critical skill set required for sustainable public financial management practices. Thirdly, staff competence levels are inadequate to comply with standards and requirements. According to the Auditor General, municipal audits for 2012-13 resulted in 84 qualified audits with findings, 138 financially unqualified audits with findings, 30 financially unqualified audits with no findings, and 83 adverse or disclaimed with findings. Fourthly, an absence of effective partnerships and leadership on the legislative mandates leads to unsustainable efforts to meet capacity development requirements. For example, partnerships between government and education, training, and development stakeholders are inadequate. The 4 strategic objectives designed to address these problems in this strategy are meant to do the following. Number 1, to support the development of an enabling environment. Number 2, enhance organizational capacity. Number 3, develop and empower a core of competent and committed high-performance employees. And number 4, create an environment that enables and sustains mutually beneficial stakeholder relationships. Key achievables and practical activities were designed to achieve these objectives within the strategy. The strategy was focused on medium and long-term efforts to support sustainable improvements over time, following on from quick wins in selected areas, such as developing a competency framework, developing occupational qualifications, and initiating education and training programs. Because financial management capacity was uneven across departments and municipalities, the strategy took a differentiated approach to implementation. Solutions were to be tailored to the needs of each department and municipality, and the National Treasury asserted that the strategy represented an integrated framework to focus on achieving the vision while directing the development of capacity in each dimension towards a common goal. As shown in the slide, the strategy required changes in institutional, organizational, individual, and stakeholder behavior, while taking account of the broader environment. This called for a complementary change management program that instilled a new culture and appreciation for public financial management and capacity development. Well, that's so much for the strategy. What actually happened? In 2022, the National Treasury Intergovernmental Relations Directorate, which has oversight for municipal planning, budgeting, and financial management, commissioned a report by the Government Technical Advisory Center to assess the effectiveness of capacity building interventions in local government. And what did it find? In response to the basic question, has the level of financial governance and health and basic service delivery across local government improved? The review found that in aggregate the answer is a clear no, although there is considerable unevenness in outcomes, both across municipalities and over time. And that is that many municipalities show improvements for a limited period of time and then either regress or fail to improve thereafter. In the 2013-14 financial year, 86 municipalities were considered by National Treasury to be in a state of financial distress. That number rose to 125 in the 2017-18 financial year, representing almost half of all municipalities. In May 2021, the Minister of Finance reported to Parliament that 163 municipalities were considered to be in financial distress, 40 were in a financial and service delivery crisis, and 102 had adopted unfunded budgets, contrary to the Constitution. To put these numbers in context, remember that the local government universe began with about 287 and now consists of around 257 odd municipalities. The Auditor General produces reports annually on the state of local government finances, MFMA reports. And in the 2020 annual MFMA report, indicated that progress in respect of good financial governance and financial resilience is extremely slow, and that the general state of municipal finances stubbornly remains below what could be considered a minimum threshold. continues to say, there is an inevitable downward spiral to a financial cul-de-sac that many of the local municipalities and districts have already reached across the whole country with very limited exceptions. Fundamentally, this is what characterizes the outcomes of the audit of financial statements of local government across the country, with some exceptions. Proper administration and superintendence over the financial affairs of local government were not exercised and were found through this audit examination, the Auditor General continues, to be seriously lacking, with some devastating consequences already evident in certain areas. The AGSA continues, the tale most often told in local government is of municipalities crippled by debt and being unable to pay for water and electricity, inaccurate and lackluster revenue collection, expenditure that is unauthorized, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful, and a high dependence on grants and assistance from national government. Most concerning are those municipalities that cannot even prepare credible financial statements, even after paying millions to consultants for assistance and receiving sizable support from provincial and national government. This is clearly a damning indictment of the state of financial management in local government by the Auditor General. But we should ask the question, why does any of this matter? While public financial management is important in and of itself, this importance derives from the fact that poor management of resources has a direct impact on the lives of citizens, particularly in South Africa, where local government is responsible for providing basic services: water, electricity, sanitation, and waste collection to residents of municipalities. The National Treasury Diagnostic Review concludes its sobering summary of the state of local government by saying that the current situation in local government is the result of a significant gap between capability, which is the ability to get things done, and the functional and delivery obligations of municipalities, which is what needs to be done. It adds that over the past 20 years, this capability gap has increased, and at the very best, not decreased. The persistence of this capability gap lies at the heart of the disappointing performance of local government. The diagnostic capacity assessment attempts to answer two main questions. Firstly, why are current capacity building programs not contributing to a reduction of the capability gap? And secondly, what system changes are needed to increase the likelihood that programs will actually reduce this capability gap? In this paper, I focus on the answers to the first question. Why are the current capacity building programs not contributing to a reduction of the capability gap? The review states that early in the research, stakeholders agreed, in response to emerging findings of the literature review that had been conducted, that the concept of capacity building was insufficient for what the state actually wants to achieve, and that a more appropriate and relevant concept is capability development. Capacity referred to potential under ideal circumstances, while capability referred to what is possible under actual, almost always not ideal circumstances. Capability incorporates a wide range of factors: individual skills, financial resources, business processes and systems, political stability, staff morale and turnover, the effective use of technology, community participation, and other contextual issues. A capacity building program might succeed in significantly increasing a person's capacity through skills development, but make only marginal improvement to their organization's capability, which is the critical factor that actually impacts the municipality's outcomes, because of constraints imposed by that person's working environment and the overarching context within which that municipality operates. The diagnostic review found 14 main factors contributing to the disappointing outcomes of the current system, and which I select the 4 that you see there, which are the most relevant for this paper. The first is a strong focus on individual capacity building rather than organizational capability development. The second, a focus on short-term fixes of symptoms rather than long-term change. The third, fragmented programs with multiple entities competing for municipal attention. Fourth, the difficulty of effecting significant and sustainable change in the way in which people do their work. What are the implications of these findings? The diagnostic review concludes that the current system of capacity building is no longer fit for purpose. and a radical change to the current capacity building system is required. I think you'll agree that this sobering assessment of capacity building interventions over more than 20 years of local government is completely at odds with the optimistic outlook of the National Treasury Capacity Development Strategy for Public Financial Management I described earlier. This begs the question then, what happened between 2008, when that strategy was written, and 2022, when the diagnostic review was concluded? Revisiting the capacity development strategy and its definition of capacity provides a clue. The strategy says that capacity development is understood in different ways depending on context. The strategy presents a definition relevant to public financial management requirements as follows. The United Nations Development Programme defines capacity as the ability of individuals, institutions, and societies to perform functions, solve problems, and set and achieve objectives in a sustainable manner. The strategy then states that it follows that capacity development is the process through which these abilities are obtained, strengthened, adapted, and maintained over time. The strategy then presents a holistic understanding of capacity development that addresses 5 dimensions: environmental, institutional, organizational, individual, and stakeholder capacity. It argues that these areas are interrelated, and it is only in combination that they allow sustainable capacity development to be achieved. According to the strategy, environmental capacity refers to the broad environmental system within which organizations and individuals function. It includes the international and domestic economic climate, political dispensation, social norms, technological developments, and general legislative frameworks. Institutional capacity, on the other hand, covers the governance, legislative, and policy frameworks of the public sector, including procedures, practices, structures, values, and systems. Organizational capacity encompasses all factors affecting the internal environment, including organizational design and development, culture, climate, leadership, values, resources, infrastructure, processes, and procedures, management systems, and technology. Where government represents the institution under institutional capacity, departments represent organizational capacity. And then finally, individual capacity forms the foundation for organizational capacity. It is reflected in the knowledge, skills, competence, behavior, commitment, experience, attitudes, and values demonstrated by staff. Such capacity is developed through formal, non-formal, and informal learning. Individual capacity is enhanced through education, work readiness, staff profiling, performance agreements, recognition and reward, learning frameworks, skills programs, and so on. Stakeholder capacity refers to the ability of stakeholders to contribute to and support the implementation of the strategy. Stakeholders include any individual or entity with an interest in capacity development, and implementation will require extensive consultation with and participation of interested parties. Continuing with our question, what happened between 2008 and 2022? It is claimed in the strategy that its objectives promote a comprehensive approach to capacity development by developing an enabling environment, enhancing organizational capacity, developing a core of high-performance employees, and promoting mutually beneficial stakeholder relationships. The strategy prescribes a set of key activities associated with the strategic priorities, differentiated per municipality, depending on its FMCCM score. It's not important for me to spell out what that acronym stands for, except to note that National Treasury uses the FMCMM to help departments and municipalities assess and monitor their public financial management capabilities. Capacity development solutions are matched with the maturity level of the municipal organization. The strategy calls for the following levers of change to be used in the medium to long term to transform the organization: develop champions of change, grow management and leadership capability, support team and group level transformation, fast-track professionalization, conduct systemic diagnosis, and strengthen knowledge and information management. The strategy all comes together as shown in the slide, which, as the capacity development says, is a comprehensive, integrated approach supported by the capacity development pillars, key activities, and strategic focus areas, while taking account of the broader environment. What is very interesting to me, reading this triumphal ending to the strategy, as everything is neatly tied up in a bow, represented by the quite beautiful, I must say, chart in this slide, is that it will only take account of the broader environment. There's no description in the strategy given of the environment within which the local state operates. Mention of South African society is noticeable by its absence, as if local government exists within a vacuum. This realization gave me pause, considerable pause. It is interesting to note that capacity, as defined in both the capacity building strategy and the capacity building diagnostic framework review, is conceptually the same. However, the impact of the environment or environmental capacity is not examined in any great detail in the capacity building strategy. Yet the diagnostic review makes clear the importance of the environment within which individual, organizational, and institutional capacity are exercised, and thus determine the capability of the organization. It would seem to me that an additional explanation of the poor outcomes of capacity building programs in the local sphere is the lack of attention paid to the environment within which municipalities operate, namely South African society. Despite the special diagnostic note, the capacity building strategy diagnosis of what ailed public financial management in South Africa overlooked what I contend is arguably its most important element, the environment. The diagnostic review states that most of the literature surveyed for the review implies both that a lack of capacity is the main reason for poor outcomes in the public sector, and that activities to build capacity, which is almost always interpreted to mean building the capacity of individuals, will result in improved outcomes in respect of organizational performance. The underlying assumption is that increasing the capacity of local government in this way is bound to lead to improved outcomes. The review continues to say that South Africa's National Development Plan represents an important shift in terminology through its use of the terms the capable state and state capabilities to deepen the description of what had previously been described as state capacity. This may appear to be a matter of little importance, whether the word capacity or capability is used, but actually is very important in terms of the aims of the diagnostic review. And what is that difference? Andrews, Pritchett, and Wilcock in 2017 make this useful distinction. Capacity refers to potential under ideal circumstances, while capability refers to what is possible under actual, almost always not ideal circumstances. The use of the term capability thus focuses attention on what is possible in a particular context, and in so doing forces critical thinking about how that context can limit and constrain what is possible. It requires consideration of the universe of factors that contribute to or undermine the performance of an organization like a municipality, and how these factors interconnect and influence each other. As just one example, a program might succeed in significantly increasing a person's capacity through skills development, but make only a marginal improvement to his or her organizational capability, which is the critical factor that actually impacts that organization's outcomes, because of the constraints imposed by that person's working environment and the overarching context within which the organization operates. The result is that it is entirely possible to invest a considerable amount of time in building the capacity of individuals and succeed in doing so without actually making much difference to the capability, the actual ability to get things done of the organization where they work. If individual capacity increases, but organizational capability does not exist, then an investment into that individual capacity will not yield the desired results. Focusing on capability instead of capacity forces us to think more critically about all the factors that affect the ability to get things done, even when the municipal officials in question appear to have the appropriate skills, capacity. Such a differentiation also implies that a certain level of individual capacity may translate into very different levels of organizational capability, under different circumstances. In some places, organizational capability will be significantly lower than the sum of all the individual's capacity, because the surrounding environment is so very dysfunctional. But there's also the possibility of substantially increasing organizational capability with a given amount of individual capacity through an improvement in these other factors, such as processes and systems, staff morale, and political stability. What might that municipal operating environment actually be like? Crispin Olver wrote a book about his experiences in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro titled How to Steal a City. This is from the back cover of the book. Crispin Olver, medical doctor, political leader, environmental activist, and public servant, joined Nelson Mandela's office in 1994 as head of planning for the Reconstruction and Development Program, and later went on to run the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism. He has had a lifelong interest in fixing ailing municipalities, and in 2015 headed up an intervention to clean up corruption in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. The cover blurb continues, How to Steal a City is an insider account of this intervention, which lays bare how the administration was entirely captured and bled dry by a criminal syndicate, how factional politics within the ruling party abetted that corruption, and how a comprehensive cleanup was eventually conducted. It is written as a gripping real-life thriller, taking the reader deeper and deeper into the rotten heart of the city. As a former senior government official and local government fixer, Crispin Olver was no stranger to dealing with dodgy politicians and broken organizations. Yet what he found was graft that went far beyond the dodgy contracts, blatant conflicts of interest, and garden variety kickbacks that he had seen before. It had evolved into a web far more sophisticated and deep-rooted than he had ever imagined, involving mazes of shell companies, assassinations, criminal syndicates, and compromised local politicians. The metro was effectively controlled by a criminal network, closely allied to a dominant local ANC faction. What he found was complete state capture, a microcosm of what has been happening in South Africa's national government. Unless you thought this was just an ANC phenomenon, Crispin Olver wrote a follow-up book describing governance in the city of Cape Town. From the back cover of his book, A House Divided, it's 2018 and Cape Town is racked by its worst drought on record. The prospect of day zero when the taps will run dry is driving citizens into a frenzy. Then the ruling Democratic Alliance removes control of the water issue from Mayor Patricia de Lille. While politicians turn on each other, revealing deep-lying fault lines and new enmities, it raises a critical question: who will lead the mother city through the crisis? Against this fraught backdrop, author and academic Crispin Olver resolves to explore how the city of his childhood is run, and he sets his sights in particular on the relationship between local politicians and property developers. Interviewing numerous people, including many dropped from the city administration in often questionable circumstances, he uncovers a Pandora's box of backstabbing, infighting, and backroom deals. Olver explores dodgy property investments in the agriculturally sensitive area of Philippi on the scenic west coast and along the glorious and lucrative Atlantic seaboard, delves into attempts to hijack civic associations, and exposes the close yet precarious relationship between the mayor and City Hall's laptop boys. And in blistering detail, he gets to grips with the political meltdown within the DA and the defection of de Lille to form her own party. Apparently, a third book on Johannesburg is in the works, which those of us with an interest in municipal governance look forward to with great anticipation. Methodologically, Crispin Olver's books are case studies of two metropolitan municipalities. Johnny Steinberg is a well-known chronicler of the human condition in South Africa. I read his book, The Number, over one breathless day soon after arriving in Cape Town from Malawi to start my postgraduate studies in democratic governance in 2005. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it to anyone wanting to get an understanding of how Cape Town can be both a highly desirable tourist destination and be the murder capital of South Africa, as a result of the spatial dislocation of apartheid and its dehumanizing effect on the majority of the people who live on the Cape Flats and not the Atlantic seaboard. The title of this talk is The Place of Collaborative Academic Research in Advancing Education for Good Financial Governance in the Local Sphere. At the beginning of this talk, I asked your indulgence to allow me to change the title of the lecture to The Place of Collaborative Academic Research in Advancing Knowledge about Governance in the Local Government Sphere. I presented evidence from the 2022 National Treasury Diagnostic Review of the system of capacity building in local government to show that education has not resulted in good governance, including financial governance in the local government sphere, which it would seem to me suggests, therefore, that we still need to understand the causes of the symptoms of bad governance that are all around us in society. We need more knowledge about the environment, the society of which municipalities form a part. And not only do we need more knowledge, it has to be derived from research that is both collaborative and transdisciplinary. The two examples I've just given describe the inner workings of government in two metropolitan municipalities, one frequently described as failing, and the other a self-described beacon of administrative excellence, while the third is a broad brush overview of the role of the state in class formation in South Africa. Broadly speaking, these can be described as qualitative research. When I was at the University of Cape Town, although I was registered with the Political Studies Department, I was affiliated with the Democracy in Africa Research Unit within the Center for Social Science Research, headed by Professor Bob Mattis. He is a founding co-director of the Afrobarometer. My public opinion research comparing attitudes to autocratic leadership in Malawi, Namibia, and Zambia was based on Afrobarometer datasets, It's fair to say that Bob Mattis was unique in the department, not just in being American, but also a positivist. His colleagues, who in the main used qualitative research methods in their work, I think found him and us, his students, to be an oddity, people who presented their paper findings in descriptive and explanatory statistics, in charts, crosstabs, and multiple regression analyses, and using PowerPoint, no less, or should I say, no khal. But I digress. The point I'm making is that only through qualitative research methods that we can begin to understand the local sphere, what governance in municipalities is actually like. This thick description allows us to generate hypotheses for what bedevils the local sphere in its failure to produce the ambitious developmental outcomes described in the 1998 Local Government White Paper. And in testing those hypotheses, suggest solutions to improve both public financial management in particular and governance more generally in the local government sphere. Detailed observation of the type documented so ably by Crispian Olver in his books and Johnny Steinberg in his is properly speaking ethnographic research, but not the kind of subject and observer dynamic that characterized the origins of social anthropology and the study of some typically non-white or non-Western other. This ethnography is about recording and sharing the lived experience of the subject in their own words. This is the first call, therefore, that I make in response to the lecture title, the need for ethnographic research to better understand the state. This has been done with great success by the Public Affairs Research Institute, PARI, which I'm sure many of you in the audience will have heard of. This is from the homepage for PARI's local government program. Capable and effective local government is central to the South African government's developmental agenda. The primary aim of this program is to investigate the factors that undermine this capability and effectiveness, to understand the day-to-day reality of administration and politics in municipalities and the factors that shape this reality. Our approach is fundamentally ethnographic, to obtain insights from the point of view of those located inside local government. The aim of our research is twofold. Firstly, to make a contribution to the relevant academic literature, and secondly, to make a meaningful impact on the outcomes of local government. In preparing for this lecture, I spoke to the head of the PARI local government program, Dr. Tina Nzo, about her work. Tina uses an interdisciplinary approach to the study of politics and policy that is underpinned by her interest in employing qualitative research and organizational ethnography to study local government bureaucracies in South Africa. Such an approach has the potential of significantly contributing to a much-needed insight into the complex and multidimensional ongoing process of state formation in Africa in general. Her key research interests in local government studies focus on examining how South African bureaucracies work in practice, the politics of precarity in representative local democracy, and its implications for the dialectical relationship between the party and the state from below, and lastly, the conceptualization of partisan bureaucracies that are permeated by the coexistence of formal and informal practices of governance and the impact that such practices have on the implementation of policies and legislation. One of Tina's colleagues, Ryan Brunette, does research on the formation, preferably over long periods of time, of public administrations. He is particularly interested in understanding the ways in which such institutions are embedded in and entwined with broader social contexts. His work presently extends to compliance regimes, civil service and public financial systems, and public procurement. He has been involved in various reform and support initiatives in these areas and his focus is on South Africa, but he understands the country in global and comparative terms. Another of Tina's Pari's colleagues, Tracy Ledger's main research interest is in the analysis of institutional failure in the public sector, on the basis that the study of failure provides better insights into causality than does the study of so-called best practice. Her work is based mainly in local government and focuses on developing new theoretical frameworks with which we can interpret institutional outcomes. She is particularly interested in the relationship between exogenous legislative innovation and endogenous institutional factors, and the ways in which the latter undermine the former. I would now like to make the case for collaborative research. Ethnography and qualitative research helps us see what is happening in the state to produce governance outcomes, and also points to explanations, allowing us to infer causes for those outcomes. Case studies are extremely valuable. But in this paper, I'm also making the case for collaborative transdisciplinary research, such as the research conducted in the CUBE's Practices of the State in Urban Governance program at the University of the Witwatersrand. The Practices of the State in Urban Governance research program was located within the Center for Urbanism and Built Environment, CUBES at WITS. I use the past tense because the program ran from 2015 to 2018 with funding from the National Research Foundation, which you'll obviously be familiar with because of this program also being funded by them. The program is described on its website as follows. The Practices of the State in Urban Governance program focuses on the three following themes or approaches of state practices to urban governance. The politics of the state-society interface, generally seen mostly from a society lens. The program attempts at also unpacking states' rationalities and framing the interface with society. The politics of policymaking, and urban policy by its instruments. The program aims at unpacking how urban policy is made and applied at a local government level in its interplay with urban societies, upper levels of the state, and its own internal political and bureaucratic dynamics. Thirdly, practices of municipal officials in changing the city. The program also focuses on practices of officials, and particularly activists in the state, navigating bureaucratic and political, professional, and personal rationalities. Why do I hold up this program as an exemplar of collaborative research in local government? What did 3 years of work on these focus areas achieve? In 2018, the program hosted a workshop which I attended, aimed at consolidating and debating the key findings of the program along its 3 main themes, with key international and South African scholars who have inspired or engaged with the theme of the program. The workshop aimed at a better understanding urban dynamics through the lens of state practices, and reciprocally to understand state practices through the lens of urban change. The state is often obscured and opaque, yet a key agent in driving change or reproducing the status quo in contemporary cities. And this field of inquiry, according to this program, therefore, is intrinsically multidisciplinary, straddling urban studies, planning, political studies, and other disciplines. The following slides give you an indication of the breadth and scope of the academic disciplines represented at the workshop. I've just highlighted there in red. I mean, you see people who from international presenters, different countries, different disciplines, people from within the program itself. I mean, it's actually mind-boggling when you go to this final slide of South African-based presenters. You see everybody from urban geographers to urban sociologists to planners, historians, sociologists, and so on. And I think that's precisely the kind of interactions, the kinds of disciplines that you want to bring together to study the state, and the local state in particular. I think you get my point. Academics across disciplines, from economics, geography, history, sociology, planning, urban studies, and political studies, and from different countries and continents as well, all collaborating towards a common goal to better understand the state. Returning to the website that outlines the practices of the state in urban governance, it says that theoretical as well as methodological difficulties have limited the amount of research on the state as an agent of change at city level. Studies on the state tend to focus at the national level and seldom take the city as a main lens. Studies on the city generally analyze state practices from outside the state and conceptualize the state as either a united, often sinister force, or as a fragmented, arbitrary, and partly irrelevant player, in particular in the cities of the South. Methodologically, it's often daunting to overcome this conundrum, both in terms of research access. State officials are seldom open to being observed by researchers and have sometimes little interest and encounter some risk in doing so. And in terms of writing, with issues of confidentiality and politics, especially in the context of democratizing and developing countries. In thinking of this methodological challenge, if you'll permit me, I would like to highlight the role of the organization I work for, the South African Cities Network. The South African Cities Network was established in 2002 by the Minister for Provincial and Local Government in collaboration with the mayors of South Africa's largest cities, the 6 metropolitan municipalities in existence at that time. Of course, we're up to 8 now. And the South African Local Government Association as an independent Section 21 company with a mandate to promote good governance and management in South African cities, analyze and assess strategic challenges facing South African cities, particularly in the context of global economic integration and national development challenges, disseminate the experience of large city governance in a South African context, and also promote shared learning partnerships between different spheres of government to support the management of South African cities. Our strategic pillars are as follows. SSCN strategy sets clear and focused objectives that enhance our value offering to cities and make the organization more effective, impactful, and relevant. In the first strategic pillar, knowledge, learning, and innovation, its goal is to co-create knowledge with cities and partners in order to transform practice at a local level and to inform and influence policies. To disseminate knowledge as practical concepts, models, tools, and policy briefs for knowledge application. And to drive experimentation, the demonstration of knowledge and learning in cities. Our second strategic objective covers voice and advocacy. And our role there is to amplify the collective voice of cities through convening and shared learning, to support cities with evidence-based policy reform, implementation, and advocacy, to facilitate dialogue between cities and all of society, to strengthen the role and functions of the SSCN Council, which is made up of the mayors of the cities who are participating in the network, to connect SSCN with senior city leaders. And our final objective is around partnerships and organizational stability, clearly to strengthen the partnership with all participating cities and embed more deeply in at least a few of them. To strengthen existing partnerships, especially those with COGTA, the City Support Program, SALGA, key sector departments, by which we mean human settlements, water, sanitation, and transport. And also to form new strategic partnerships with funders, civil society, business associations, and alliances. In order to achieve its objectives, SSCN works with a broad range of organizations, public sector organizations, universities, and research institutes. We have an MOU with the chair here, regional and global networks dealing with city and urban issues, and other non-governmental organizations. Our thematic focus areas are guided by the principles of integrated urban development and our SSCN's pathways to change, whereby the theory of change is that high-performing cities are well-governed, productive, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, and are innovative. The thematic areas make up 5 programs that support strategic objectives that I just described. The Well-Governed Cities program fosters well-governed, financially sustainable cities that are fully accountable, capable of driving local development in partnership with whole of government and all of society, and that enable their citizens to realize their full potential. The Productive Cities program aims to ensure urban economies are inclusive, resilient, and sustainable through supporting cities to respond to shocks, creating an enabling environment, invest in the development of human capital and job creation, and integrate the township and informal economies. The Inclusive Cities program focuses on how SA Cities Network can contribute towards safe, spatially transformed, and interconnected communities with equitable access to services, social and economic opportunities, especially for those in the most vulnerable, children, youth, women, and people with disabilities. The Sustainable and Resilient Cities program focuses on the contribution the SACN can make towards the just transition, using its strategic pillars to assist and support cities in the development of economically equitable, socially inclusive, and ecologically sustainable cities. Finally, the Innovative Cities program is a portfolio designed to drive innovation by ensuring integration across SSCN's programmatic work. This is done through collaboration, experimentation, and learning across SSEN programs. Its core mandate includes developing and driving urban data and smart cities initiatives. The program also coordinates the South African Cities Network's secretariat role for the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is South Africa's urban policy, through city-level projects and partnerships, and is responsible for producing South African Cities Network's flagship research product, the Restate of South African Cities. I'd also like to draw your attention to this slide where we have a number of peer reference groups, and these are all groups of cities, practitioners, organized by theme, as you'll see there. And I'd like to draw particular attention to the peer learning group called the Built Environment Integration Task Team, which has used innovative methods from developing a game called Citopoly that allows all of society and people who play it to see the impact of the city operating environment on development outcomes. To a Healing Hands support group, as you can imagine, working in a municipality is very tough work, and it's actually literally a group who gets together on Fridays and do mindful meditation and practitioners just to distance themselves from the crazy environment they work in. And then also a retreat for city practitioners, which I wished I'd gone on with. They went with Jay Naidu to the Free State and hung out in the Drakensberg. So, SSEN's flagship publications, if anything, or if nothing else, I should say, SSEN is well known for its state of reporting. I would like to draw your attention in particular to the State of South African Cities 2021 and the State of City Finances 2022. The State of South African Cities report comes out, and the icon doesn't seem to have shown up there, every 5 years in the local government, in keeping with the local government election cycle. And why do I refer to these publications in particular? Because they suggest an agenda for collaborative research moving forward in urban governance and municipal finance, which broadly speaking returns us to the main theme of the lecture today, the role of collaborative research in achieving the outcomes that we wish to see. You might have asked us, what took so long? It's because we focused on the nuts and bolts, on the built environment, on infrastructure to deliver basic services, on the budgeting, finances, and planning required to achieve spatial transformation. And yet here we are, 20 years into local government, and spatial transformation has not occurred. In closing, let's really get under the skin of the state and the individuals within it. Let's understand it deeply, collaborate across disciplines in deriving research questions and answering them, and then figure out what to do informed by this knowledge, comfortable with the fact that we're not working towards an ideal, but walking with what we have, and that will have to do. Thank you.
So, can you hear me well? Am I on the mic? Fantastic. Danga, thank you so much for a very, very enlightening talk. I'm sure that you will agree that we all understand the surface of this discussion, but that today really let us into some of the details around the dire state of municipal finance in our country. Danga is also very modest. That State of City Finance report on the last slide that you've seen, he is the main guy behind that every 4 years. Every 2 years. And also providing us as researchers with incredibly valuable information that is not readily available otherwise. So I've written down quite a few comments, and I definitely have questions, but it would not be appropriate for me not to first turn to the audience. And we've got a roving mic. Derek so kindly indicated that he will run. Fortunately, you don't have to run too far, Derek. Can I see who would like to pose a first question or to make a comment on Danga's presentation? I see Cassius's hand, and I see a hand of a gentleman of who I do not know the name. I apologize. So let's go first at the back and then moving to Cassius here in the front.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is it functioning? Oh, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dobi Maloba, a final year LLB student here at Northwest University Potchefstroom campus. Firstly, I would like to thank you so much for such a stellar presentation. It was really informative and eye-opening. I would like to pose two questions. The first one is focusing on what amount of influence does research generally, or specifically on CLES and NRF, have on the policy-making process? Because as much as I know, the research is not binding on the public administrators and also on the policymakers. It serves as more of an advice. So I find it somehow, I don't know which proper word I can use, but I would use irrational for such good researchers not to be binding on the policymakers, or their influence to be less on them while they are excellent. As a result, we end up having a problem on the implementation process, although we have excellent research. Then my last question will be on it is similar to the first question. It is focusing on, as much as we have excellent research outcomes, but on the implementation side by the public administrators, we keep on having failures. As you have mentioned, that in some aspects of the local government, we have fruitless expenditures. However, one would find that on the side of research, there are good outcomes on how to tackle on such failures, but it keeps on happening as much as we have such outcomes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Derek, I propose that you move to Cassius. Let Cassius also present his question. I'll throw one in the mix too, and then Danga can respond to the 3 sets of questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was quite apt, very condescending. My question really relates to, you speak very profoundly of the multidisciplinary research. So I wanted to ask, do you think South African universities or universities in general should actually adopt probably a teaching style that is multidisciplinary, that is inclusive of all other areas of learning, in order to actually attain good local governance?
And then from my side, Danga, I was wondering, considering that many of us in the room are lawyers, or legal scholars for that matter, you've elaborated quite extensively on the operating and operational environment that's part of the problem, and I fully agree. I was wondering the complexity of the municipal finance legal framework in South Africa, whether you think that adds to the problems experienced in the operational environment, the complexity of the law. And together with that, I try to see how many of those scholars I know that you've had on one of these last slides, the names in red, the people that collaborate within the unit at WITS. They are all established. Most of them are senior academics or senior researchers. And do you think we do enough investing money, call it what it is, in funding emerging researchers in this field? Thanks.
Okay, great. So I should respond now. Thank you for those questions, all of which were definitely thought-provoking. And that first question, yeah, that's a question I ask myself. We ask ourselves at the Cities Network all the time, because I think, and if I didn't make the distinction or make it entirely clear, the Cities Network was basically formed by the mayors of the major metropolitan municipalities in 2002 when they said, you know what, we are all comrades, went through the struggle. We have determined that local government and its no accident that the local government, the vision for local government came in 1998, long after the Constitution, long after everything else. Because as we all know, apartheid was experienced locally, you know. We live in a particular location, which then determines our access to services, determines how far we are from work, and so on. So it took those extra years of thinking to say, this is the coalface of development. This is where we're going to transform societies, and hence that idea of spatial transformation, of reversing, and in fact, that's a classic policy. So thinkers in the space have been calling, and the Cities Network. In fact, our first State of South African Cities report came out because the feeling was in 2004 was that national government was having their conversation, provincial government was having a conversation, but people had forgotten about the local space. So we said, hey, you know, we're still here. This is where people are feeling, you know, don't have water, don't have electricity, have 4-hour commutes to get to work, and so on. And it has been many years. I think at last count we have, I think, almost 220 publications out of the Cities Network, and our research model we're able to do that is because we very often contract out and would have people, academics like yourselves, people, it's open tenders, and people write work for us, and so on, which allows us to produce a tremendous volume of work within each of those areas. But sometimes, you know, each State of Cities report, you say, but we're saying the same things again and again. Spatial transformation, densify, you know, make it possible for people to live in the center of cities, closer to work, subsidized housing. You need to have a genuine public transport system, because taxis aren't a public transport system, they're a private business. You know, all these kinds of things. And once again, and particularly in the early years, it was those same comrades who sat there and wrote these policies. So, you know, if I knew the answer to that question, I think I probably would be the president. But yeah, it really is, no, it really is a conundrum. I mean, because the documents are there. I mean, there's the other cliche we've often heard is that South Africa has wonderful plans, but we just never implement them, right? And so many different areas, very progressive constitution, this and that and that. And it's a strange, and especially in the governance space, I struggle to understand why certain policies which make tremendous sense. So one clear example would be, for example, we have advocated for a long time that the human settlements function should reside with local government. It shouldn't reside with other spheres of government, because when you're creating a human settlement, by definition, like as that transport issue, so surprise, surprise, because RDP houses were built far away from the centers of cities, which any urbanist would have told you was a major mistake. And that purely is because you left it in the hands of somebody else, another sphere of government. So, and even thinking about transport, there's a very interesting comparison of BRTs, which we took from Bogota, Colombia. But guess what? If you actually look at our townships, even the townships themselves are quite scattered. I don't know if you've seen pictures of Brazil's favelas, and they're dense. But you go to Soweto, it's actually quite a spread out area. So to get that density, to have a bus that you can fill and run profitably, a big bus, run profitably every 5 minutes, is a major problem. Whereas in Medellin, this is not a problem for them. So there are many of these things which and the evidence is there. It's proof. People have gone. They've gone to Bogota. They saw this thing. So I really don't know. It's having said that, it's not uniquely a South African problem, but I do think, and the reason why you asked that question, and I think why it bothers us so much, is because the consequences of not doing those things are so impactful, and we see them every single day. In Germany, if you're corrupt, everybody's driving a VW anyway. So if one person gets a BMW, it's like it's not so much of a muchness, right? Whereas here, someone is not eating because of your corruption. Someone is dying because of your corruption, and this is why I think these issues. So I don't have an answer to your question, to be quite honest. I think you'd have to ask a politician in those rooms. And in fact, this is one of the things in our new strategy that we're really focusing on, is to figure out, do we need to be good? Do we need to get in the ear of people who are in the National Executive Committee? Do we need to go to Cabinet CLES? Do we need to go to MINMEX? Like, how do we get these ideas into the policy space in the hands of decision makers who can actually implement them? The other question about finance, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, why does it happen? I think that varies depending on the municipality you're looking at. One of the things we've always been at pains to state within the cities network and representing, as I said, the 8 biggest cities plus Msunduzi, is that despite the clickbait headlines within the metropolitan municipalities, fruitless, irregular and wasteful expenditure, which is one which could possibly be corrupt. I mean, just because it's been flagged that way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's been stolen or whatever. The other often findings around things like procedural issues, so like technicalities in a court case, right? Which is not to say they're not great, but it doesn't mean that money has been stolen. But in metropolitan municipalities, it's a very small percentage of turnover. However, having said that, we know that there are many other municipalities where it is a massive problem. And I think it goes back to that question of the environment within which people operate. A piece which I was thinking of including in my talk today, but I was timing it and realized I wouldn't have time to speak to. But if you look for Johnny Steinberg in the Business Day, he had a really wonderful piece last week where he speaks about the role of the state in class formation. And he says that the state basically, the state is essentially the major employer and created the middle class that we speak about. Comes from the state since 1994, particularly outside of the metropolitan municipalities. If you're talking about small municipalities, say in Limpopo or in Mpumalanga in the northwest, the major employer is going to be government. So clearly, just for good reason, people will want to have government jobs. But that then also creates, because those communities are smaller, ethnic ties are tighter, family ties, the lines become blurred in a different way. And that's true of small communities anywhere around the world. And I think that's a very interesting thing, which, however, Johnny Steinberg does say, and in contrasting Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma, he said, but Thabo Mbeki understood that this was going to happen. But he said, though, but the state needed to have National Treasury as a technocratic center, and the most powerful ministry driving things like public financial management and so on, and saying, we'll create the state, but we'll run it under certain rules. As we know, under Jacob Zuma, it became, I think, old school kind of, I don't like that term, but primitive accumulation, and people were it was a free-for-all. But there are ways in which, because the state has to remain, as I say, we're in the current situation we're in, we don't have the economic growth rates in the private sector, and the state will continue to be a large creator of middle-class mobility and upward mobility for the majority of the population. But it's this question is, how is it managed and how do people relate to that? Then the question around multidisciplinary research teaching. I think I should defer to the director of research here. That's the thing, isn't it? Is that the irony is that even in the academy, what do they say? People used to say the fights are so strong because the stakes are so low. So even schools of thought within disciplines, right? It's like this school won't talk to that one, but you're both geographers, but no, these people, heaven forbid, literally go to different conferences, won't talk to each other. So, yes, multidisciplinary research is a wonderful thing. So, as I said, I'm not an academic, I couldn't speak to that, but I'm sure there are structures in collaborative multidisciplinary research, I'm sure has been around for many years and as a catchphrase, so it does definitely happen, I think, to varying degrees of success in different places. In response to the question about, yes, I would absolutely agree that one of the things that, and in fact, I now have an idea of an expert reviewer who I should ask if you wouldn't mind reading her paper. So Tanya Ajam, who used to be a member of the Financial and Fiscal Committee, has actually written a paper comparing probity and performance and asking this question about, is there just so much regulation? And it's all for good reason, as I say, and the thinking was, the more rules you make, the less likely money will be stolen or taken or misused and so on. But local government practitioners will tell us that compared to province and national, the number of regulations they have to follow and make sure they've checked this box and checked that box and not done this and not done that is a huge burden in and of itself. And the interesting thing, actually, speaking from personal experience at the South African Cities Network, the chair was asking me earlier, how are things at the network? So we used to be a very small organization, and we're quite nimble, and by nimble meant we could kind of do really cool things. So as I said, that Sitopoly game, I mean, someone literally came in and said, why don't we make a Sitopoly game, for practitioners? And they went off and did it. But we now have someone came in from the public sector, very kind of rule-driven, and we all now have like quarterly reporting and targets, and yet it's not like we weren't working before, but now literally 1 week of every month is reporting, and it's arguments about but you phrased the sentence wrong, like a target, must be smart, and yeah, this is important, of course, but literally 25% of our time is now spent on reporting. And this is exactly what we used to talk about municipalities. And it's all for good reason, of course. We know it's public money, but the point is, it's not like we weren't working before. Our output has actually declined because of this. And so what do you want, right? And yes, definitely there are people who are trying to get around the rules. But the other thing, and I think it was King 4 in the report said, rules are rules. There are always smart people who get around them. You can have any number of rules in any society, and if someone wants to get around a rule, the rule it's about the attitude, it's about the mindset. There's some universities where they don't have invigilators, It's literally purely by trust. We trust you to write this exam and not cheat. As simple as that. Yeah, but they're small and they've developed this culture. So that kind of thing. Whereas you get very rule-bound societies where people will always find a way to steal or whatever, get around the rules. So I think that's the response I'd say. But I do think it is an important question because it does have implications for the speed with which the country is able to meet the backlog in infrastructure in particular, and I think around supply chain and so on, the amount of time it takes to get an approved bid, go through all the hoops to make sure you haven't, you haven't contravened any supply chain regulation, to actually get the project going, but you can only contract for 3 years. So that's why we see, the roads aren't being done, because there's a lot of money, and you hear of money being returned simply because it can't be spent in time. Which seems to me to be a tragedy. And there's got to be a balance somewhere. I don't know where that is, but the people responsible for that have to find it.
Thank you, Danga. The one question you didn't respond to here at the end, which you don't have to comment on it, but I was quite taken aback hearing the statistics on the deficit in terms of skilled people, especially in the municipal finance space, which to me signals that we need to invest in generating more, is it now capability or capacity? But yeah, we need more skilled people in this field, and it's difficult. It's not an easy field. That is the other part. You need smart people, mathematically strong, and having an affinity for accounting. Most people, they want to become lawyers. They don't want to go into numbers, speaking for myself. But I see Oliver's got a question. Can I perhaps see anyone else? Then we can again collect a few. Gentleman there so Oliver, the gentleman there at the back, apologies for not knowing your name. And then we've got Ledile, and I saw one other hand, Maricel. So 4 questions collecting, and then you can respond, Danga.
Thanks very much, Anel, and thanks, Danga, for a very insightful presentation. The question that I want to ask relates to the point that Anel raised about the statistics that we have in terms of skills gaps in different government departments and in municipalities. And I know you have put emphasis on the need for us to be able to focus more on building capability as opposed to individual capacity. But I think individual capacity is also very important, and you've acknowledged that. Given the gaps that we have, do you think that it is still necessary for us to have this policy of affirmative action in relation to employment, especially in this context? And I ask so because I know that in many instances that policy is abused. We have people who don't meet the competency requirements in the Municipal Finance Management Act, who have been appointed, while some people are completely sidelined on the basis of race. And a few years ago, about 4 years ago, I was reading through a report which indicated, in the context of planning, a bit of digression, that we also have acute shortage of skills in that area, and that about 50% of the planners that we have in the country are in the Western Cape. So the other 50% are spread across provinces. But I was shocked. A few weeks ago, talking to one of my colleagues, who indicated that the son is a qualified planner, but he's been struggling to get a job for over a year because he's white. So do you think that it's time for us to start relooking at this affirmative action policy or stance that the government has adopted, given the fact that when things crumble, all of us suffer? We've been hearing reports of outbreak of cholera and other things in Gauteng. People are dying. It may not necessarily be as a result of lack of capacity, but it may be as a result of affirmative action and black economic empowerment in terms of award of tenders and all that. So I think that's something that I'd like to hear here.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to thank you for such an insightful presentation. My question, or I would like to find out from you, is that how can collaborative academic research be used to promote transparency and accountability in the local government finance? And in relation to that question, what role then can technology play in that? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Innocent Zaoma. I'm a PhD student PhD law student at Mafikeng campus. Yeah. So I've got two related questions. The first one pertains to the environment that the local government is now in which it's contending with coalition governments. Wanted to find out your comment to say, would you say coalition governments have made any improvement to the state of governance in the local governance? And also related to that, I wanted to find out your comment relating to the location of local government in the three spheres of governance that we currently have. It would appear from me that local government is finding itself in a tussle with provincial and national spheres of government, and there is no proper coordination. And so those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Danga, for the presentation. I have a question that's it's a twofold question. So the question is, how can stakeholder capacity in this capacity environment be built if our organizational and financial capacity of local governments are constrained and services are not adequately delivered? And would you say that in this environment, or in the 5 different dimensions that you mentioned in your presentation, is there space for self-learning and capacity building, or perhaps something like adaptive capacity to achieve things or goals such as resilient cities?
Okay.
That's a mouthful.
Okay, no, thanks for those questions as well. Definitely. I mean, one looks at the skills gap, as you mentioned, in Oliver, in municipalities. The fact that I think, as I mentioned, that it's very difficult already for, even despite the fact that private sector wages are much higher, there still are people who want to work in the public sector and perhaps who can't because of the current rules around affirmative action appointments and so on. And I think this is one of those. I suppose it's an unintended consequence, right? So people are either gaming the system, as you suggest, or not hiring people, and it shouldn't necessarily be that. And it seems quite tragic that you'd have someone who wants to work, but simply cannot because of a particular rule that's been put in place. And this definitely is one of those, I think, one of those areas where, I think the kind of argument I'm proposing is that we really need to understand, I think, from the perspective of the humanities, how it is that we, I suppose, got to the place where there would have been felt this need to have the affirmative action policy in the first place, but also to understand the effect within society. So, for example, there's been a lot of discussion around, or I think particularly coming from the Democratic Alliance, to say that, that we should consider positions based on class rather than race, to look at class rather than race. But if someone was able to do the research to show that evidence that would suggest that would make more sense, so that would be something, for example, I think in any kind of policy of that nature, if you had evidence to back up some of the arguments that are being made. So in other words, if someone is white but from a poor background or class background, how different are they perhaps from someone who is Indian or black and comes from a similar background, went to the same sort of schools? Now, 20 years, 25 years after 1994, do we need to look at how those things are calibrated differently? So I think that definitely is a space where, and it's obviously very contentious politically as well, so there's a reason why policies like that agitate people on both sides very, very much. So it would be a difficult one, and I think a clear example where you're sticking to evidence rather than and having clear evidence to support arguments for and against would be useful, because it is such an emotive topic. I think how collaborative research around transparency and accountability and the role of technology. Well, I think technology is one of those things where I think it should be used to put. So one of the things I think in the State of City Finances 2018, there's been a lot of use of technology for there's been calls, and in fact in some countries they've already started implementing blockchain technology in the procurement process and supply chain management, because you can't tamper with a blockchain, and so this would be a great way to use technology to strengthen those kinds of processes. But at the end of the day, they're still being run by people. Some of those decisions initially are being made by people. So I do think it's important to still understand also, and this also goes to some of the research around, I think one we want to understand just corruption, concepts like corruption, concepts like accountability. I think it's important for us to think of some of these things. So just to give you an example, I was fortunate and privileged enough to growing up that my father, even though he was a university lecturer, I was able to go to a private school. And in Malawi in the 1970s, even then, we were in the minority. So there were like the 3 or 4 of us Africans, and the rest were like Brits and people like that. And so I grew up, and I remember, I used to speak Chichewa to my mother after coming schools. How was school? It was great. And within about 3 years, you speak English the whole day. I don't speak Chichewa as much anymore. I start speaking, so now I dream. English is my first language. I dream, people in my dreams are speaking English, right? But, which is very strange. It's alienating. But as I say, that's just what happens. And what was really interesting is that, I went back to Malawi to live as an adult, having grown up in India and the US and everyone. We left when I was 7. At age 30, and I ran a business. And people would come and ask me for money, but they'd be speaking to me in English because they knew, but they'd be Malawians and they'd say, "Can you lend me this money?" And so in my mind, it's a loan, but in their mind, it was a gift. And I know it sounds so and at this moment I was like, this is the epiphany, I've had a major sociological insight. But if you think about it, actually, because it's in our language, it's about the language interpretation. So I was coming in a very Western way of this is a loan, and I expect it back, But you see the person in the street for weeks, greeting you, no shame, and you're like, but you owe me money. So even things as I say, concepts like corruption, like accountability. I know it's not specious actually. These could have consequences. And when you think of the indebtedness, for example, in African countries, in the 1960s, when you had someone from the World Bank sitting across the table from the president of Malawi, I don't know, maybe in his mind, he was like, well, they're giving me this money, but, you know, it's not, I can pay it back. I mean, do you see what I mean? And for example, that's why you will never get an apology. The Queen will not apologize to the Afrikaners for the Boer War, because an apology has financial consequences in Western society. The King will never apologize for slavery in his role as head of state, because then he'll have to pay compensation to the survivors of slavery. Whereas us, culturally, the Afrikaners, we just want an apology. Just, you treated my grandparents badly. Yeah? Just say sorry. Can't you just say sorry? You know? And that's that difference. You see, but these are cultural differences, even among Europeans, right? This different understanding. So it's so important in the humanities to understand what we mean by concepts, and we bandy them about and so on. And I think it's really important. And this is why I think we need much more than just rules written down on pieces of paper and how people understand them. The other question, yeah, coalition governments, complete disaster. I mean, to put it mildly, I mean, I think it's a consequence of, okay, it's good in the sense it's a consequence of greater choice. And so people are being elected, and people who are ostensibly representing voices which weren't being heard before are now at the table. But the problem is, and the way our system works and the way it's been working so far, is that typically those small parties who actually represent smaller numbers of people become kingmakers in the coalition. And so they then start having the ability to say, oh no, we want this position, we want that position. Because the other thing is, I mean, local government, and as I mentioned, Chippy Ol's books, everybody's doing it. Parties have to run somehow. And so the fact of the matter is, even in the West, I mean, if a businessman who's affiliated to the Conservative Party gets a contract, they're likely to give a certain percentage of the money they get as a profit of that business to the Conservative Party, just as, you know, that's just the way politics works. And so this is why there's this jockeying for position, which is, as I say, is the way it is. But the danger of coalition politics in particular, and what we've seen is, it's the instability. So that institutional capacity we're talking about, even within a very small institution, but municipalities are huge institutions, is that when you know your boss, you're not sure if your boss will be there the next week or the next. The senior appointees who are appointed by the politicians have to be wary of what they're going to do. It has a knock-on effect all the way down, believe it or not, even down to the cleaner. It just shakes stuff up, you know. Even, I mean, you can the very obvious ones, which are that if you squabble over a budget and you don't get it passed by June, then you've missed a deadline. So there's that kind of politicking. But there's also just this sense of instability, and it really has had an effect on coalitions. And in fact, in the State of City Finances 2022, we show that among the metros, there's a strong positive correlation between the length of time that a CFO is in position and a positive audit outcomes. Just having institutional memory, continuity, whether good or bad, there's just something about stability in organizations that is generally a good thing. And coalition governments, unfortunately, are the complete opposite. And I think it's something that we're just going to have to learn to get used to. I suspect come 2024, there may even be coalitions in provinces which we didn't have before. So it's something that's going to happen, whether national in 10 years' time, who knows. But it's something that people are just going to have to get used to, because it is possible, and there are many countries who have proportional representation systems. Like in Europe, I think it was in the Netherlands, I think for 18 months they were still negotiating, but the government still ran. You know, there wasn't a crisis, but they were just negotiating the coalition all that time. So we need to get to that point where it's institutionalized enough that people know, okay, you leave the administration to do their job, we do our politics here, and the system just runs. I mean, and having said that, if it works that way, then everybody's at the table and different voices are represented, which is great. The role of local government within the system. Our constitution talks about co-equal spheres of government, which is very different. In many other countries, so there's genuine devolution to the local government. As I mentioned, the vision is of local government as a sphere, as the core face of development. And in fact, national and provincial government are tasked not just with oversight of local government, but also to assist local government to the greatest extent possible that they can deliver their fundamental mandate, which is bulk infrastructure to provide basic services, to provide electricity and water to both businesses and residents. And I think this is a function of the political party system we have, where because it's not constituency-based and it's party list-based, there's a hierarchical relationship within parties. So the more senior people are going to tend to be at province or at national within a political party, and the junior partners are going to be in the local sphere. So even though they're supposed to be co-equal according to legislation and so on, but when they're at the party meeting and where party decisions are being made, the role of the local person is not there. How can stakeholder capacity be built to with the current financial constraints? That's a good question. In fact, that's one that we're trying to address within the last South African State of Cities Report 2021, and its theme was actually around the cooperative governance approach. So we're calling for greater cooperative governance, but also a whole of government approach, and this is now a national province actually working to support local, which we feel they haven't done, and to the extent they should have. And then also about the all of society approach. So in fact, a municipality is defined in legislation as not just the administration and the people sitting within the building, but also everybody within that jurisdiction. That is the entire municipality, and the local government white paper calls on local government to be both a provider but also a stake, mobilizing all aspects of that society, whether it's faith-based organizations, civil society organizations, private sector organizations, to kind of work together for this developmental vision that we have. And so that is something that definitely has been lacking, and is something that really, so there's a group actually out of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, have done some really interesting work focusing on particularly around food security issues, but also in crisis situations. I mean, when you get to the point where people are like, why doesn't Gift of Givers just take over Makanda? You know, I mean, they must just run the place. You know, so there are, in fact, there are things which local government just doesn't do very well, and they should just let people, go out there and do it. But unfortunately, there's, kind of political issues there as well. Can self-learning capacity building to achieve goals? I mean, I think very much so. I think self-learning, this again goes to now the climate within within an organization. If you have a leader who is open to learning and wants to encourage their staff to learn, that's a kind of initiative that would probably prosper. One of the things that we also call for, just as organizations in general, and we call for in the State of City Finance, is also within the bounds of that quite strict regulatory framework, is to say, but what about cities who generally get clean audits? We know they're not generally corrupt. Like, why not allow them to find an innovative way to deal with homelessness in Cape Town, for example? You have people who want to think about it. Just let them come up with some innovative solution. But you need the organization and your boss to be like, yes, I know that's the rule, but I'm going to give you cover and allow you to try this. And try and fail. If it doesn't work, it didn't work. But if it works, guess what? You have a solution. And so trying to get this culture, but as you say, when you have a rule-based, regulatory culture, it stifles people who want to try and do something slightly differently. That isn't necessarily about stealing money or cutting corners. It's about just trying to find a solution from someone who has a different way of thinking of things than perhaps the rest of us might. So.
Thank you very much, Danga. I think that the discussion after your presentation almost beats the content of your presentation. It was so rich. Thank you very much also, everyone, for the good questions and for enabled Danga to share a bit of his experience, which is vast, I'm sure you could hear. We have been busy for quite some time already, and I'm not going to stand between you and the lovely refreshments, but I do have a few formalities. First of all, Danga, once again, please feel thanked. We truly appreciate that you came all the way. We've got a small token of appreciation that Nonhlanhla is going to hand over to you. We hope this was not the last visit. We definitely hope to see you again in Potchefstroom, and that is just something small from us. Then also, Prof. Mitsi, we would like to invite you to the front too, not only for having done the welcoming, but generally for your support of the chair, for having spent this afternoon here. We know that your schedule is extremely tight. We hope that you also enjoyed the talk and something from our end. And then we thought, just to keep it interesting, there's also a mystery winner. So please, I'm not exactly sure how this has been done. Nonhlanhla, you need to help. I just know that there is a mystery, but you need to let us in on what it is.
Very well, Prof. So in between the seats, what we put is a business card, my business card. So if you look in your seats, and if you find yourself having a business card with my name and surname, then that person is our mystery prize winner. There we have it.
Do we have a winner?
There we have it.
Oh, wonderful. So we've got a little something for you as well, and very appropriate because, ma'am, you often attend CLES functions. So this is very, very appropriate. And then I am in depth. Nonhlanhla, you've seen her face, you've seen her name on the marketing materials. She, with the huge help of Bernali and also Derek on that side, who's done the running, with the support of the rest of the CLESians, have done a splendid job in arranging today. And I'm very thankful for the professional way in which you've done this. Thank you very much, Nonhlanhla. Bernali hopefully can hear. And the same to you, Derek, as well, and all of the CLESians sitting here in front of me. I'm sad to think that this is my last Prestige lecture, but I'm happy to know that the relationships are strong enough to last, and I hope to be back for a future Prestige lecture. Oliver, Prof. Theo here in the front, as well as Prof. Lamine there on the side trying to hide. Thank you also as colleagues from the faculty for having attended this afternoon. It is much appreciated. And I'm now going to conclude, unless I forgot anything, by inviting you over. We have our refreshments just opposite this venue. And please be back in future for events of CLES. Thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon further.